Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We are going to get started in about 5 minutes, so feel free to get comfortable and relaxed. And as you are doing that, feel free to type your name in the chat and where you're joining us from today. We're so glad that you're here.
Days that waiting, so go and take them and start living your life. Boy, why are you angry? You're always running, tripping over your shoelaces. And I know it's not been easy. I watch you searching for the right thing in wrong places.
Hey, for those that just joined us, we are just getting settled and getting ready. So feel free to type your name into the chat. We'd love to know who you are and where you're joining us from.
Hey, it's okay, you don't have to play this game. There's so much more to you. There's so much you're gonna do. And those midnight lights only ever dimmed your skies. When there's days that waiting, so go and take them and start living your life. And stop just getting by. Boy, hey, it's okay, no, your love's not just for change. And you'll find the real thing, so stop pretending. Cause those midnight lights only ever dimmed your skies. When there's days that waiting, so go and take them and start living your life. And stop just getting by. Boy, what are you doing? Getting caught up in the things that disappoint.
Hey everyone, we'll get started in just about 2 minutes. Most of y'all are kind of getting the idea here, but as you're joining and getting settled, we'd love to just hear your name and where you're from. So feel free to type that in the chat and we'll get started soon.
You left your footprints heavy in the dirt. A trampled mess, now nothing's left but thorns and hurt. I sit alone and watch the petals turn to dust. Go easy on me, cause I'm still catching up. Was it wrong to hold on so tight? Was I naive to think I ever had the right? And in my dreams as they fade into the night, it's you and me, so evergreen, so evergreen.
All right. Thanks to everyone who's been typing their names in the chat. Welcome, Jacqueline. Welcome, Al, Angie, Ian, Brittany. Awesome. Hi, David. We're so glad you all are here. Welcome to this webinar. I'm just going to get us started here with a little couple slides here. We're so glad to have you here. My name is Travis Atkinson, and I'm a board member with the Crisis Residential Association. And we welcome you to our webinar today. Compassionate Supervision in Crisis Care, a compassionate performance-based approach. I'm just trying to make sure our recording is good. We're all set. Wonderful. A few housekeeping items I want to go over with you today. First of all, we are on Zoom, obviously. We have our chat feature, which many of you have gotten comfortable with using. Please feel free to use that throughout the presentation, especially if you want to reflect on something that you're hearing our presenters talk about. But we also have a Q&A feature, and that is going to be the best and most direct pipeline to getting your questions answered so they don't get lost in the mix of the chat. And we will be monitoring those questions and periodically bringing them to the presenters. So we don't plan to wait until the end. We've checked with our presenters; they're very comfortable with kind of fielding those questions and weaving in your curiosity into what they're talking about. Our webinar recording and slides are made available to members of the Crisis Residential Association. So we will share a link with all of our members within a few days once that is uploaded to our private YouTube platform. So if you are not a member, we encourage you to consider becoming one, as that is one of our member benefits. Lastly, you will receive a survey once this webinar is complete. We would love to hear both what your experience was like as well as what you would like to see in future content for webinars. A quick little bit about CRA. The Crisis Residential Association is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the operation and clinical functions of crisis residential programs around the world. Rooted in the values of empathy, recovery, and continuous improvement, the association seeks to connect providers with the best ideas in behavioral health treatment to transform the way people receive mental health care. And you can learn more about CRA at crisisresidentialassociation.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, Amelia Lehto and Brianna Green. Amelia currently serves as the Director of National Programs at HopeLink Behavioral Health, where she oversees the strategic development and quality assurance of national services. With HopeLink's expanding national footprint, Amelia plays a critical role in ensuring the excellence of service delivery through robust standards, training, and programmatic oversight. She brings 15 years of experience in crisis services, beginning as a volunteer at Common Ground, a local crisis line in Michigan, and since then has worked for multiple organizations, including 6 Feet Over, Crisis Text Line, CNS Healthcare, and the American Association of Suicidology, as well as Kevin Song. Brianna Green is the Director of Crisis Services at HopeLink Behavioral Health. Bree found her passion for crisis intervention at the age of 17 by volunteering at a local crisis line and was inspired to further her education. In 2014, she graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Michigan State University, and then she returned to Common Ground's Resource and Crisis Helpline as a paid crisis worker and was soon promoted to crisis coordinator. As a person with lived experience of suicidal thoughts and a suicide loss for survivor of 2 friends, she has critical insight into the experience of those living with mental health concerns. Please join me in welcoming, however you want to, perhaps with a virtual hand clap, Amelia and Bree. We're so glad to have you here, and I will let you share your slides.
Thank you so much, Travis. We have been handsomely rewarded by those from Common Ground in our experience and tenure. So shout out to Common Ground. We saw a few of you in the chat, rocking things over at MyCal in the state. Welcome. So I believe I have made the request to share my slides, and we're just tuning them up on the back end. Thank you so much, Travis and Marty in the background. So welcome. I am Amelia Lehto. I am the Director of National Programs here at HopeLink Behavioral Health. We are based out of Virginia. If you're not familiar with us, drop by our website. We'll drop it in the chat. And as Travis said, we more than welcome engagement, conversation in the chat, as well as the Q&A, which will ensure that your questions are answered in a timely fashion. And if we just get an abundance of Q&A, maybe we'll send you an email after the fact. So welcome, and we hope you participate and take away what works for you in your organizations and consider what you might do in the future. I'm going to hand this over to Brianna Green. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amelia. Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here. It's really nice to see some familiar names in the chat. I am surrounded by friends, supportive people. That always helps the nerves in these situations. And especially those who already saw this presentation or a version of this presentation at CrisisCon. Thank you so much for coming back. That's so cool. So we started here when we were presenting at CrisisCon. We felt it was really important to pause and kind of have a moment of grounding and intention with our fellow attendees. This year was especially interesting given kind of the landscape that we're all living in with the uncertainty around federal funding and kind of political support across the board for the work that we do. So we thought it was especially important to kind of take this moment while we're saturated with so much uncertainty, given kind of the state of the world politics. And then, of course, as leaders, we only have so much control, but not all of our staff or the people that we work with know that. So we face a lot of barriers and we hear a lot of grief on a regular basis. So really just encouraging folks to focus on what we can control in addition to the things that matter and finding that sweet spot. I think it's really important for us to sustain the work that we do and find the things that we can control realistically when we know a lot is out of our control at this point. Next slide, Amelia. Before we kind of dive into the agenda and the presentation itself, just wanted to share a bit about where we're coming from at HopeLink Behavioral Health, which is based in Oakton, Virginia, but is a purely virtual remote workforce. So we employ crisis workers, supervisors, and various staff positions from around the country. A few no hire states, but predominantly anywhere in the U.S. you're able to work for HopeLink. That was something that was very necessary. I'm sure as many of you experienced with the launch of 988 and finally being a crisis line that has FTE requirements and some robust funding. That was crucial for us to be able to access people who are interested in this work. We provide statewide 988 operations. So we answer about 85% of the 988 volume that comes from those living in Virginia. We are one of currently 2 contracted regional crisis call centers or 988 centers in the state of Virginia. It's an interesting model. I won't get into it, but the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services does have Virginia, the state, divided into regions, which determines what locality or community service board is serving that individual based on that location. So we work with currently 4 of the 5 regions and have had really great partnerships in ensuring that the different unique needs of individuals from different parts of Virginia are getting the services that they're needing based on their situations. And then, of course, we have our national programs. We're a national backup center, both voice and chat and text for 988, which is kind of the side of the house that Amelia is overseeing. Like I've kind of hinted at, we're an integrated statewide crisis system leader. Virginia's been a bit ahead of the curve in terms of integrating 988 and really getting their crisis continuum work kicked off. We were one of the first states, I think, if not the first state, to implement the 50-cent tax for 90-day calls, which has supported the funding of our center and our staff. So really grateful for all of the buy-in that's come from our state legislators and state leaders and the support that they've continued to show us to sustain the work that we're doing. Next slide. So just an agenda, in the spirit of being trauma informed, we love to make known what is unknown and share a bit about what we're gonna be talking about today. Also want to set expectations. We don't have like the perfect supervision form, plan, layout for each of you because we acknowledge that each center, each organization, and the work that you do is unique so that everything that we did might not apply to you. But what I do hope is that we can give you some tools, examples, and questions to ask yourself and to start looking into to implement something similar, hopefully that would benefit your staff and your organization's mission overall. So just don't want to read the whole slide to you, but defining the problems is really important. So we'll go through the problems that we were seeing that I think a lot of other 90-day call centers can relate to, but it might be a little different for those who are coming from different crisis spaces. Of course, data is huge here. As we all know, especially with federal and state funding, the more data, the better. So honing in on how we can use that for not only our external stakeholders, but how it can benefit our staff and help them grow. And then, of course, defining a process and implementation plan. We know implementation plans, project management can be very difficult in this landscape with things kind of changing day to day. So It's not about perfection, but about doing the best you can with what you have. So hopefully we can guide you in that process a little bit here as well. And then I get to kick it off to Amelia, talk about our presenting problem.
Problems as we have. Thank you so much. So we wanted to address one of the biggest elephants in the room is the remote work environment. This really has kicked off predominantly in our field in the last 5 years since the impact of COVID. So in real time, we went from in-person work to shifting online, and the growing pains in that have been apparent, and we have also learned a few things along the way. So name it to tame it is one of our go-to mottos of addressing and having conversations and identifying the root issue to unpack and rebuild, which has been part of the impetus and movement of addressing often a highly complex crisis workforce and how to support the change and shift that some folks have coming into this remote work environment, the multiple platforms that they may use, and how they communicate with one another, addressing the emotional overload of not only working in a remote environment, but the fast-paced work that is 988 oftentimes. And that's often transferable into in-person work that many of you have as well. So, some of the root issues that we had found were that our supervisors were protecting and taking care of rather than coaching their direct reports, which there's a fine line. We want to emotionally support, but also relate accountability, flexibility, and that we learn as we grow oftentimes in this work. So coaching up was one of the biggest pieces that flagged to us that a change and shift is needed. There was also challenges with entry-level supervisors, learning the ropes, getting familiar with how to navigate remote supervision while holding themselves accountable as they found their own routines and understanding of what their role truly is on shift daily, and then supporting as direct supervisors as well and managing attendance, performance, behaviors, etc. And then the shifting motivations that we've seen over the years, right? It was survival at the time of COVID going remote and the ability for us to stay remote and grow even further outside of the bounds of Virginia, where we are located and have our other side of the house, the behavioral health side of the house. So our crisis services team has grown exponentially from 40, as I had shared, to we're nearly 300, including volunteers as well. So the motivations have changed. Crisis work really truly began out in California with some of the groundbreaking work of Dee Dee Hirsch and founders in the field. And people went in person to give back to their communities. And we still see that today. However, the appeal of working remotely, hiring folks from more rural areas that may not have as much access to the hourly rate that we offer or that any of us offer is certainly an appeal. So we have an advantage there that appeals folks coming into this work and doing what they need to support their families, give back, but the motivations have changed. So the conversations have needed to change in that. The pros for remote work in particular is that there's less financial burden, work clothes, the time spent traveling, gas, the expenditures there, working in a space that feels more comfortable, familiar to them. However, with that, it also has the cons of less connectivity. We're all social creatures in one way or another, and often shared physical space builds rapport, builds understanding, builds camaraderie. And we have found that we've had to ebb and flow to adjust our leadership styles and relay that to our entry level supervisors in particular of how to make those connections, how to make them meaningful, how to sit in the discomfort that is addressing concerns happening, and how to build rapport in those conversations, getting to know your direct reports, having those conversations, clarifying if something is misunderstood, or asking for clarification if you're understanding them correctly. And then taking advantage, one of the harder pieces is taking advantage of the freedom of working from home. One of our constraints working remotely is that folks have to identify where they're working from. So it's not a remote role that one may think that, you can go to the coffee shop or go to, your other home if you have one, or go on vacation and work. We do ask people to stay in their identified location, which has been a challenge to have those conversations, to hold folks accountable, and to ensure connectivity. Ultimately, what it comes down to. The connection is what builds the rapport with those that we serve, and we need to ensure the stability of the Wi-Fi, and everyone is hardwired in. And that has been a pain point that we've had to address. Another challenge is the saturation in emotion and reactivity, right? Getting acquainted to working with individuals, addressing concerns as they come up throughout the day, handling our conversations, supporting those in crisis, working and adjusting to change in workflows. The build out for mobile crisis response has been a significant change for many folks, and working to address and support our community where they're at, and working to address and support our private providers that do support and go out into the communities for handling mobile responses, in particular for our state. Um, Again, the retention challenges have been apparent, the lack of understanding in the role, having poor boundaries, our supervisors are coaches versus a personal therapist, which we've had to relay and share the appropriateness and where the boundaries lie with engaging one's staff, and how to shift their perspective and understanding of how and where and when they can be best supported on shift. And then just building as we grow, learning and shifting to support, again, their understanding of their roles, the compensation, the culture, and the motivations. We're really working to address that cohesively.
Just yeah,
Great.
before we move on, I think
Yeah,
one thing I always like to name at this point in the conversation, and even if like it's not during this presentation, something over the past few years that I felt is really important to name is that this workforce didn't exist. We crisis work has been predominantly volunteer based for people who have lived experience, who have been impacted by suicide loss or other crises, want to do the work, they want to volunteer. They volunteered 3 to 4 hours a week most of the time. So with the launch of 988 and the requirement of hiring these FTEs, we're hiring people most likely who don't have any of that experience or any familiarity with this field at all. So I think in fairness of all of us who have kind of faced the struggle to build this out as quickly as it was asked to be built out, we really we're starting from the ground up, building the plane as we are flying it, and finding people who are competent in this work in a virtual space at a fast pace is incredibly difficult, as I'm sure many of you all know. So that's something I like to say to give us all a little grace, and remind we all became competitors as well, which changed the amount of collaboration that happened between centers and the ways that we were able to support each other. So I just think all of those massive changes in the field and the approach are important to name as we have these conversations.
absolutely. Thank you. All right. So, with part of that is the feedback. I saw, please explain this to her. Yeah. If we could get a blanket, right, statement out to the funders, the intricacies and the challenges, and then the challenges that come up, right, of meeting expectations, standards, KPIs, productivity. Thank you. Appreciate the engagement in the chat, everyone. So what we were hearing from our crisis workers, exit surveys, complaints, grievances, or just conversations when we would go into what we call our virtual call center. So one of those pieces that we initiated early on was a Zoom hangout space essentially for those on our phones, chat and text. They would break out into their separate rooms. So national backup phones would be all in one space, national backup chat and text, our local 988 Virginia chat and text, and the phones and the like. And then there would also be debriefing sessions and process rooms and training rooms as well. So folks would be moved out into their relative centers. So we're able to stop in and see where folks are working. And we went from on camera to off camera and engaging and being available to do those breakouts or do a quick debrief face to face for the coaching sessions, supervisions. But what we were hearing from these conversations were that they were not getting meaningful feedback. It felt superficial. They felt, right, some of the move and change from going on camera to off camera was feeling punitive, that, we're watching you, when it wasn't about one to be watched. It was engagement, have that opportunity to see each other and make that visual cue and understanding when we're in, right, the call center or in the workspace. We can see what's happening. We can uh, understand if maybe, we're moving from, a silent monitor to silent monitor, that so and so over there in the corner needs another set of ears, and we could see that visually. So that was the impetus that ultimately came down as punitive with how it was being received by our crisis workers, or that the work was not based in their quality, or but their quantity, and having those conversations and being able to balance, right, the how long you're staying on a call and is it appropriate, or is there a way to address and have a more productive conversational piece and address that. So again, those root issues being addressed, the skills were not being worked on in a more meaningful way. The conversations weren't happening face to face at times. There was feedback just being shared out in our Teams message or in an email. And we found that folks receive critical or constructive feedback more openly when we have that face to face time for conversations. They felt they were being asked more questions and receiving directive rather than engagements and skill development to work on different ways to engage a person in crisis, or how to best apply the safety assessment with a contact. We wanted to get into the skills-based approach versus observable performance behaviors that didn't quite build that understanding and tie to the work. And then again, they didn't feel like they knew their supervisor and their lacked general trust. We wanted to get a space in place for folks to get to know each other, for our supervisors to have more one-on-one time, and to have group supervisions as well. So we'll get more into that as we move ahead. And then what supervisions looked like at the time. So generally they were bi-weekly for our full-time folks, which are a predominant section of our staffing at this point. We've moved away from a heavily part-time model to a more full-time. And that was quite time consuming as well. So building in those group supervisions was critical, as we saw. The supervisor to employee structure has been one-to-one, and the growth of that has been challenging, just the numbers game, ensuring that we had proper supervision to our crisis workers that needed such critical support. And then the supervisor was not always scheduled on the same shift as the employee, so having to address and change that model as well as staffing grew over time. Again, it felt more performative than supportive, and having to find that balance is key with the procedures in place, with the disconnection that can happen, and the he said, she said, they said game that can happen as well when you don't have a consistent supervisor on shift. So ensuring that folks are meeting one another, getting that shared time, and working to have more constructive conversations around our KPIs, our productivity, and the community-based approach for those that we serve ultimately. That we wanted to build that emotional awareness, have them relay and understand data and how to interpret and coach that type of engagement to understand the asks that are being made or addressing after call time, things of that nature. Strengthening our supervisory relationships to build more trust, to build more understanding, regular conversations around feedback that were more effective and timely, and then addressing emotional regulation as well, and having to see right the growth in adherence, performance, and the reliability of our staff. All right. Bree, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you. So we had a ton of data at our disposal. Information or lack of information was never really an issue. So we were looking at what we were tracking, just starting there. We have the typical KPIs. We were really lucky. Currently using Five9 as our cloud-based system, and the data reports that we're able to get from there have been incredibly helpful. They tell there's a very clear story about what's happening on shift with certain individuals and how they're using their time. We had supervision meeting occurrences being documented and uploaded into a shared space where leadership had access to review. Tons of QI and QA information, thanks to Lifeline and the Vibrant Exchange portal, where we've been tracking all of that. And we've been able to kind of mimic the scoring and the guidelines for that internally. So we have our own internal scoring as well, just to make sure we're on the same page and doing what we need to be doing there. And again, the data existed. Training completion and the attrition rate in training was something we looked at. It's something we've struggled with since the launch of 988. Shift adherence, like I said, how people are using their time on shift, if they're in queue when they're supposed to be, and if they're not, why not? And kind of that goes along with kind of the level of effort of what we're seeing from staff who are on shift. So all of that to say is we had a ton of information at our disposal. The issue was not everyone knew what to do with it. Again, like we said, we have entry-level supervisors coming in and other supervisors or lead supervisors, managers who don't necessarily have as familiarity with the data, what it means and what to do with it. So we knew we had it, just wasn't sure how to help our staff learn how to kind of analyze it and act on it, whatever the story is telling, whatever needs to be corrected from that story. Next slide, please. And the results we were seeing from this one-on-one supervisions, even with all of that data accessible, is that we had chronic attendance issues. People were really struggling, I think, with the heaviness of this work and not necessarily being able to find the balance of how to take care of themselves and do this work, especially being in their homes. Like, while that familiarity is really helpful, can provide comfort to people, it also starts to blur the lines a bit. And I think people also expected a remote position to be a little more flexible. And we've had to explain many times, this is shift work and you need to be on shift when we expect you to take the calls that we're expecting you to answer. Like I said, lack of understanding about data and the impacts that individuals had. So there was a big focus on the overall KPIs, the overall answer rate. We're in a unique position in Virginia because the volume that we are receiving from 988 is not at all what we anticipated. It is exponentially higher. So we've struggled with staffing because of that. We were not funded for the amount of staff needed to answer the calls we were receiving just because it was not projected to go that way. So we told people over and over, the answer rate is not the indicator that we're looking at here, because we know it's impossible to get to a 95% answer rate with the volume that we're receiving and with the staff or the funds that we have for the staffs that we have. So it was really more about learning how to connect the bigger picture to the individual picture. We needed them to focus on the day-to-day and how their behaviors within the shift, even minute by minute, were impacting the overall rate. Not looking at the overall rate, but looking at the levers that we can pull to show some improvement. And if it didn't show some improvement, at least we could show that we were doing everything in our power to try. Importance of naming the changes to the field again was something that was really important for our staff too, so they didn't feel like they were failing with these kinds of results that we were seeing. And then focusing on correcting behaviors versus performance was a pattern we were stuck in for quite a bit. Our staff really struggled with it, like, you're not where you're supposed to be during this time. Let's talk about that. You need to do better. It was very not punitive, but I think it felt punitive to a lot of people and very correcting oriented versus, hey, what's going on? How can I support you as a supervisor? What skills can you work on to make you feel more comfortable to help you show up to work when we're expecting you so that you're not spending so much time off of the queue in shift because we really need help answering these calls. Even though we know we can't answer all of them, we need more answered. So it was interesting results that, to have, you have all the tools, you have all the data, but it just goes to show that without enough time, without enough infrastructure to really teach people how to examine this, how to make use of it, it ultimately was just sitting there. Next slide, please. So building the foundation, this is where the compassionate supervision kind of comes in. I think some people expect the compassionate supervision to be really emotionally supportive. And, that worked for a while in the grassroots model. When you had 4 volunteers on shift, they were donating their time, they shared their experiences, you built, bonds with these people. At Common Ground, we had the best debriefing room I've ever seen with a couch or 2 couches, a coffee table, different fidgets, and that was where you could go. You debrief with your staff every 4 hours on the calls that they were taking and how they were doing. And we still definitely believe in debriefing here, but there's just an adjustment when you're doing it in this space with 200 or more staff members who are needing support, but are also needing resilience because the work isn't stopping, the calls aren't stopping, and we need to find a way to make this sustainable. So what we had to come to grips with is that compassion and supervision isn't providing therapy or using crisis skills on your direct report. Those skills can be very helpful in times of escalation, if there's an active suicide attempt, if there's a sentinel event on the lines. Of course, like, we are there to support our staff and de-escalate them. But this is a regular occurrence happening in supervision versus the coaching and the skill building and the professional development that we were really looking for. Just checking my notes. So in the approach that was being taken, where it was a lot of emotional support and commiserating on how miserable things are, there was no guidance, there was no direction, or no clear expectation. That created a lack of safety for our staff who are working in incredibly complicated and heavy situations, and ultimately wanting to sustain this work because this is their livelihood. So people want to make it work. They know they have it good with a remote position. But I think it gets to a point where they're not sure if they can anymore. So in the previous workplace, we always heard clear is kind. If there are clear expectations, people are going to feel safer. They are going to feel more supported. And that is ultimately what compassion is all about. And compassion is also commitment to seeking alignment versus punishment and correction when there's a needed change in performance. So again, approaching with curiosity. Unless it becomes a clear pattern that someone is not able to stay on the lines when they're supposed to, so on and so forth, we really should be approaching people with curiosity, assuming the best intentions until we have data to show otherwise. And we saw that those conversations weren't happening because it was such a reactive process. People just felt the pressure, wanted to make it better right away, but we still had to feel that pressure and find a way to be intentional about it. So that was really important. Making sure I hit all the points here. Pushing down the responsibility onto managers and supervisors. This was difficult for us kind of at the director level because we all came in with a lot of experience in the crisis world. We were kind of unique in that way. So kind of taking over was a gut reaction that some of us had to try to make things better. And we realized that we no longer have capacity to be so involved in the day-to-day. So it was really important to build out our infrastructure beneath us so that people could support the day-to-day work. We could really focus on the oversight and our stakeholders and making sure that we're doing what we need to do as an organization to be marketable and sustainable. Okay. And I think we're good. Move on to the next slide, Amelia.
Thank you, Bree. Love that. So we identified the issue. You're you've heard some keywords around so far, and again, I want to invite you all to take part in the chat. Some of you are. Thank you so much. You're welcome to post in Q&A if something resonates you want some more clarity on, but you're welcome to. So we've identified the issue, and we've identified what our pillars really stand for in this move and change that we've been making with our supervision model. So we want it to be collaborative, person-centered, and focused. We're not offering therapy. We're not there to be a place to debrief, though that's certainly a component and offered relative to what's happening in one's life or on the lines. And then the importance of creating roles and adjustments and responsibilities for those existing roles. So clarifying what supervision is not was key, and relaying that to our supervisors, and then sharing that the roles and responsibilities were being reshaped to support this new model, and moving our shift supervisors along with our crisis workers as direct reports to under coaches. So having our shift supervisors in the current sense that we look in their day-to-day roles and their operations to leads, functionally working the day-to-day areas and key components, watching the dashboards, handling breaks, attendance, communications, addressing consults and interventions, and coaching through those day-to-day models, and having those be more deliberate and assigned to our leads on shift, and then implementing a coaching position, which works with our crisis workers through the entirety of their life cycle, from training through their time with us, which is averaging a couple of years at this point. I have to bring that data up to date, but we're hopeful with the progress that is made so far, and expect better results with our retention and lower attrition as we've implemented these changes. And then again, our coaches are there to support with co-regulation, navigating those conversations with empathy, and providing them the tools that they need to handle these conversations and know when and where to draw the boundary for safety and support, and referring out for services that our staff may need. I think Marty wrote, there's a thin veil between our staff and those that we serve out in the community. And that's absolutely true. So ensuring that we have the necessary tools and resources available is critical. We do have two different employee assistance programs that we do refer out to. We are in regular communication with our human resources and adjusting our approach and how to support our coaches and our supervisors that are on the lines, and ultimately our staff in any role and position. And building up the psychological safety, really leaning into, as much as possible, a transparent, communicative, performance-based approach that is driven by our KPIs and the expectations set forth by not only our stakeholders, our funders, but for us ourselves to uphold accountability and credibility with the work that we're doing and offering. The debrief, I think, in the traditional sense, that what we were seeing previously was there was regular and ongoing quote unquote debriefings with supervisors. It was blending into that therapeutic approach, and they were spending a lot of time with individuals on shift and even after shift. We do have a 24/7, 365 service. So there is always a supervisor, clinician, manager, director on at any given time, and leaning into those supports and needs to address employee relation concerns versus on shift debriefing of a critical incident, a emotionally charged contact, those things of that nature that I'm thinking and are separate and apart. So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that. ability to clear that up. So what we put forth, some building blocks. So I'm going to invite Bree back on. We're going to tag team this for a bit.
Thank you. And I did
you.
realize I did miss
Yeah.
one portion and kind of I think it was building the foundation. I'll say this quickly. I know we're running short on time, but our staff have been hungry for very clear black and white policies, procedures, lines, and measurements. That's another change and adjustment I think that we've had to make because, again, in the smaller kind of grassroots model, things were nuanced. Supervisors on shift, we had more of a confidence, more of the experience, and probably less pressure. But we're able to kind of make those calls in the it depends ways. I spent a week or a few days last week with the Council of State Governments Justice Center and some other states, and we decided that when it comes to policy and social work and crisis response, we really it depends, should be every policy. But that doesn't work, right? When people aren't feeling as secure and well versed in the work and just don't have the experience. So building policy and building measurements whenever possible for people was important, while trying to really bring home that flexibility is still really needed when you're working off these policies. That remains a challenge. That is not something we have completely fixed or addressed by any means, but we're trying to give them a little bit of what they're asking for so that they feel more secure and confident. The building blocks. So this kind of gets to the question of why we're not debriefing. And the thing is, it's not that we're not debriefing, is that we're finding the appropriate space for it to ensure that things like one-on-ones are used for coaching, skill development, real problem solving, and any personnel issue that needs to be addressed. So that's why we decided to go with the restructure where shift supervisors are no longer directly supervising people. They are only responsible for what's happening on shift. So a coach is the person that is directly supervising a crisis worker, and they follow the crisis worker from their first day of training through the entire crisis worker life cycle. That's something different for us. Previously, it was trainers worked with you in training, and then we assigned you a shift supervisor when you went on shift. And you can imagine kind of the lack of rapport there was and how difficult it would be to start this work feeling really vulnerable and scared about the calls and the chats and texts that you're going to get, and not feeling the most comfortable with the person that you're supposed to go to. So having someone who is with them throughout their whole life cycle, knows where they started, knows where they are now, knows how they best learn, was the answer for us. So the one-on-one meetings happen with the coach. They're reviewing interactions, and it's really focused on performance and the data that we have on performance, which comes from our quality assurance managers. Quality assurance managers for consistency are primarily doing our reviews. They're providing written feedback to the coach so that the coach can personalize that feedback, because as we all know, we don't all receive feedback in the same way. So that being a personalized process was still really important to us. But for consistency of measurement and the data we're providing, Vibrant and our other stakeholders on quality, having those assigned people who are quality experts doing the quality reviews themselves was really important. Process groups are where we imagine debriefs happening. Obviously, there are really intense situations that happen on shift. So a shift supervisor might be called to debrief someone in the moment while on shift. But again, we're just asking that to be separate from a supervision or one-on-one. So we have process groups offered several times a day on various shifts by our clinical team, who is staffed 24/7. They're supporting with mobile crisis requests and any clinical complexities of crisis calls, but they're also there for our staff. So there's typically an assigned topic, like familiar voices is a very common one. So people have an opportunity to be heard, to feel validated, to hear the other experiences people have, and then to share coping skills and how they can be resilient and how they can handle the calls a bit differently so it doesn't affect them as much. And then coaching groups, so that there's an opportunity to have clarity on performance, and they can talk through the data points there. So they're not completely blind to data KPIs, but they have a coach who's putting them in a group, who's structuring it and who's making sure that it applies to the work that they're actually doing in the moment, versus just saying, here's a scary number that's in red and we have to fix it. Really, it's a really collaborative process that provides clear guidance and expectations for what they can do to improve their performance, which can ultimately improve our performance as a whole. Anything I missed that you want to add there, Amelia?
No, I think you captured that nicely in
Yeah,
the yeah build out for which leads to right the QA and
yeah.
the coaching.
Very clear lanes we felt have been important with the size of our staff in our operation.
Absolutely.
Next
Thank
slide.
you. Thank you. We did have a couple comments. Deborah contributed. It's so hard to put in writing the process and process it depends. So it depends, right? It's so challenging to get down to staff. And when it's easier, right? Of like I do this step that leads me to this step that leads me to this step. And yet when we come to addressing individuals' circumstances, there is consideration. If we have somebody calling out or leaving early every Tuesday, what's happening there? We've noticed, right, a pattern of every Tuesday this person is calling out. Let's have a conversation. Let's call them in to address. We have noticed this pattern in your attendance. Can you share what's happening in your life? And that took trust and being receptive to hear what was impacting versus a 1, 2, 3, corrective action. Um, we could address, right, a schedule change or a shift down in their break time, things of that nature that we can explore and levers that may take some creative conversations, but understanding the nuance of holding one accountable and also being consistent in that accountability. Part of the conversations that we've had amongst our management supervision team is the equity and ensuring there's equity across decisions that are being made with consideration for how those decisions are being made as well. Thank you. Okay, so Bree, do you want to speak a little bit about this piece? We can,
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but
yeah,
basically these are the building blocks of
kind of
the
building on.
data that we were looking at when we're having conversations about performance. Um, Shift adherence is a big thing. We've been fortunate to have a workforce management system that just has a visual, in addition to some detailed reports that shows when someone's supposed to be on cue, when they're not, when they're going to break, if they're supposed to be going to break during that time, et cetera, et cetera. Past performance, looking at patterns was really important for our coaches. They need to be keeping an eye on patterns so that we're addressing things in real time and not letting them build up to the point that, oh, HR is involved now and it's kind of blown up to a thing that none of us want to deal with. And then a call answer rate's still in there, but again, the importance is that the coach is connecting it back to the individual performance and reminding folks that call answer rate is not one person's responsibility, and that the circumstances around what we're dealing with in the state of Virginia are really important to consider when we're looking at call answer rate.
Mhm.
Next slide.
And some of the, yeah, and so I wanted to say just some of the questions that we may ask to address some of the concerns if we're noticing a pattern in the handle rate or answer rate or after call. Addressing what's happened. Did something happen on the contact? Are you challenged here? Where are you feeling stuck in the call and how to navigate the conversation best? Thank you. Oh, this building on what we what you assessing what we had and what we can automate. So our workforce management system is one of the biggest pieces that we have built out over the years, and we're looking forward to even more growth and contributions and ability to address and work in real time to navigate this. Hi, Emily Norton. Um, Contacts longer than 20 minutes because contacts the calls are averaging around 20, but addressing what levers we can pull there and how to adjust and account for it, and the impact for considerations of police interventions if there is an active rescue initiated, the state of current suicidal ideation. That's not to discount, but it's to address and ensure that our team has the tools and resources that they need to do the work that they do best in real time. And how we handle follow-ups and build that fully into our process from chat text to phones and handling our mobile crisis referrals, um, which is providing us better insight and buy-in as we work to explain and stabilize and build up the culture of understanding and transparency with folks. All right. Implementation, we've talked a little bit about that, but I do want to be mindful of time. Bree, do you want to add anything here?
I think I would like, I know I think there's some questions. So if we can
Yeah.
maybe get to
All
that,
right.
the last four slides are very
Yep.
self-explanatory. So I think if we can share those out with folks, um, that'll kind of do it. If we want to keep scrolling through them during the Q&A, I'm okay, unless
Okay.
Travis has a different idea.
No,
We
that's
talked a
great.
little
We
bit
can
about
definitely
that.
do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, we're ready to start answering some questions.
All right.
Okay, awesome. So, um, we were just saying that in our field, sometimes instructions are more like suggestions, which is fine. We're also very adaptable humans. So when it comes to the questions, some of you have been putting them in the chat, but you are also welcome to put them in the Q&A, and we will kind of field them and get those going. So um, let's let's see. I think a couple of these questions have been answered already, but can you both take a look at just the last couple so that we can get oriented to where we ended with the last comment that was addressed or the last question that was addressed?
Sure.
I don't think we've addressed Megan's question.
Okay. So Megan was asking a question about how does this look for your agency? She said her agency has about 6 clinicians on at a time, and they
Mhm.
face a difficulty with having time to be a part of those meetings or groups, but getting pulled out for calls. Just this common occurrence in crisis services that it's hard to even just get through a meeting without getting people
Oh,
pulled out to
absolutely.
go do things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we typically have only about two clinicians on at a time. And one is assigned the process group while the other is left supporting shift. This might be unique to our clinical team. Our clinical team does not take calls directly. They are there for clinical oversight and support. We have crisis workers who are the ones who are answering those calls directly. So that is very helpful. And then we have constant communication happening in Teams channels, consult channels, where clinicians are tagged so that if there is a consult needed, a clinician can take a look at that. If they're in a process group, obviously we try to avoid that as much as possible, but you kind of have to be flexible in the moment. There are days where process groups or a process group a day has to be canceled due to staffing, things like that. So it's really being continuing to be open to being flexible to the demands of the shift, but of course not completely giving up on providing process groups and support to the direct service staff. But they've worked together really well. But I think that the fact that our clinicians don't directly answer calls might be a difference there.
Okay.
And the scheduling, working in real time while planning ahead has been one of those imperfect balancing acts of, here's focus on today, and here's the focus on the next few days, and separating those responsibilities as well. Being more planful and scheduled out has been quite helpful, particularly with the process groups. But as we know, things do happen. So establishing boundaries, calendars. We have been building up our calendars, blocking out time, and letting our teams know that you are not on call 24/7. That's not what's being asked of you. So when you're off, and you can refer them to the next supervisor that is on shift or to the director. We both have our on-call phones, so having those boundaries set is critical as well.
Great.
Thanks,
There was a
Travis.
request from Julisha to just go back 2 slides, maybe to the implementation slide.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, there's also a question that came from Courtney that said, is the coach at times interfacing with HR? How does that affect trust with employee to talk to coach?
Yes, the coach, yeah, interfacing with HR. We've gone back and forth kind of with our processes with HR quite a few times in terms of limiting who's involved in communications, realizing the barriers and the struggles with that. Amelia and I are only two people, so we can't be the only people who are managing any requests or concerns or needs that are coming from HR. So we found that transparency has actually been an improvement in the relationships for our staff between their coaches and between HR and our staff, because when there was such a separation with only really directors being able to communicate with HR about these issues, people were feeling undermined and unheard. So it was actually really important to bring the direct supervisor or coach of the person into the conversation. They have the most context, they know the person best. And so we do that, as equitably as possible. And there's some certain situations where that might not be possible, but for the most part, we've actually found that that's been a relief for our staff to have that access to HR and the transparency and the information provided.
And we have also shared out and built up the escalation process that folks are truly encouraged to have those direct conversations face to face with those that are impacted or the concern may be with. If that's not welcomed, they escalate it to that individual
Right.
supervisor and then follow the chain. And we also have, the grievance and complaint process, and we have found good data
Mm-hmm.
on the folks embracing that approach and understanding that it is not an us versus them, that we're all on the same team, and that we all have the priorities of our community that we serve at the
Yes.
center.
Great. Bree, Amelia, any final thoughts before we wrap up for today?
Hang in there, y'all. Keep doing the good work. It's not unseen or unappreciated. If anyone appreciates it, it's your fellow crisis people across the nation. I really thank everyone for their participation and their engagement, and I welcome any further discussion, questions that people may have.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think with compassionate supervision is uh, being as authentic as possible. Obviously there's things that we have to hold as leaders in any of our given organizations, but being receptive to trying something new, trying something that's imperfect, that you can work out the kinks and concerns and issues, and being agreeable to working with your team to see what works best, because what is good in theory may not be good in practice, especially with the ebb and flow of the nature of the work that we do. Thank you all so much for coming.
Great.
And if
Amel
you're in need,
Amelia and Bree, would you mind just typing your email addresses into the
yes.
chat just so everyone can have those? Just a couple more slides that we wanted to share for today. One is to learn more about the Crisis Residential Association. You can visit our website or follow us online. You can also join us. We offer free webinars like this from exceptional crisis leaders, discounts on conference attendance to CrisisCon, access to webinar recordings, and membership levels available for individuals, organizations, peers, and students. You will receive a copy of our post-webinar survey, but if you want to scan this right now, you can do that as well to complete that. And if you have any other questions about our organization, you can email us here. So again, Amelia, Bree, thanks for a wonderful webinar. Thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.